All right, today we're stepping into what's being called a crypto Zen garden to deconstruct the Pulse Zen token, or PZen. We're going to use its own white paper and documentation as our guide to break down the philosophy, the mechanics, and, the risks of this pretty unique crypto experiment.
So here's the game plan. We're going to start with a big picture, this whole Zen garden idea of the PulseChain community. Then we'll zoom in a bit to see how that philosophy actually inspired a token. From there, we'll get into the real nuts and bolts of how that token, PZen, works. And finally, we'll wrap up with the really crucial stuff, the rewards, the risks, and all the disclaimers laid out by the project itself. It's kind of like a journey from the clouds down to the ground. Okay, first up, the crypto Zen garden. Now we're starting here for a reason. The source material basically says that to understand the token, you first have to understand the mindset of the community. It's framed as way more than just tech. It's about a shared identity.
And wow, this quote, pulled straight from community discussions. It just says it all, doesn't it? It paints this picture of a safe haven, a crypto ecosystem supposedly built for the little guy, intentionally standing against all the big, powerful players. This is pretty much their mission statement right here.
You know, to really drive this point home, the community uses this great metaphor. They say if Ethereum is this crazy, chaotic, bustling marketplace, then PulseChain is meant to be a quiet tea house. It's an idea that's supposed to make you think of a calmer, maybe more thoughtful place to be. And look, this isn't just about cheap transaction fees or some technical detail. The source material describes the core belief here as a Zen-like faith. It's this idea of patient, resilient optimism, a belief that they're playing the long game and will come out on top, kind of like a tough plant just waiting for the right season to bloom.
Okay, so you've got this whole Zen garden philosophy. Cool. But how does an idea, a vibe, actually turn into a token? That's what Section 2 is all about. Looking at how this philosophy was supposedly translated into an actual financial asset. And that's exactly where the PZen token comes in. It's explicitly framed not as just another crypto coin, but as a direct experiment. It's their attempt to take that whole ethos of community and fairness and literally write it into the rules of the code.
That brings us to the really interesting part, the core idea behind PulseChain. The project calls itself a coded experiment, and they use this key phrase, socially engineered. So, what on earth does that actually mean?
Well, according to their own white paper, a socially engineered token is a crypto asset where the financial rules, the tokenomics, are designed from the ground up to achieve a social goal. In this case, that stated goal is a more equitable distribution of wealth among the people who hold it. So let's see how they try to pull that off.
All right, so we've covered the what and the why. Now it's time for the how. In Section 4, we're going to pop the hood and look at the specific mechanics of a PZen transaction, all based on the official documentation.
Take a look at this. This is the anatomy of every single transaction. A small percentage is automatically skimmed off the top and split three ways. Part of it is redistributed, part goes to charity, and a tiny bit gets burned. So the person on the receiving end gets about 97.8% of the transaction, and the rest goes to work inside the ecosystem. Let's break down those little fees.
The biggest piece of that fee, a solid 2%, goes to something they call PIF, or pay it forward. And this is really the engine behind that whole socially engineered concept. That 2% from every single transaction gets automatically divvied up and sent to everyone who holds the token. The more you hold, the bigger your slice. The whole point is to reward people for holding on.
Next up, you've got the burn. It's a tiny, tiny fraction, just 0.01% of every transaction, that gets sent to a wallet nobody can access. Poof, it's gone from the supply forever. The intended economic effect here, as they state it, is to create a deflationary pressure, making the remaining tokens just a little bit more scarce over time.
And the final piece of that transaction fee is for charity. 0.2% gets funneled into a dedicated wallet. The plan, down the road, is to create a DAO. That's a decentralized, autonomous organization, which is basically a system where token holders get to vote on how that charity money actually gets distributed.
So, that's the basic mechanics, but that is definitely not the whole story. There are some advanced features and, more importantly, some very direct warnings we have to talk about. This brings us to our final section, the potential rewards and the explicit risks.
To get people to provide liquidity, you'll hear them called LPs, the documentation makes a pretty bold comparison. It puts the typical 1 to 3% you might get from a bank right next to a stated potential yield of 18 to 25% for participating in their system as an LP. I mean, that's a huge difference that's definitely designed to get your attention.
And here's the twist. Those high rewards aren't paid out in PZen. Nope. They're paid in a second, different token called PZIC, the Pulse Zen Incentive Token. This token is described as potentially being more valuable than PZen itself, and according to the project, the only way you can get it is by being a liquidity provider.
But just as your brain is processing those potentially huge rewards, bam, the project's own website hits you with this stark disclaimer in no uncertain terms. It is a very sharp, very sudden pivot from talking about yields to just issuing a direct warning.
And they don't just say it once. That warning is reinforced all over the place. This quote from their FAQ section is crystal clear about the high-risk nature of this thing. There's no sugarcoating it. They're telling you straight up that the value could absolutely go to zero.
So it is crucial to understand this fine print. They state you must have no expectation of profit from the work of others. Now, that very specific language is there for a reason. It's an attempt to avoid being classified as a security under the US Howey test. They also remind you that massive price drops, like 85 to 95%, are basically normal in crypto. And then you've got the standard but vital warnings. You are responsible for knowing the laws where you live. And the most important one of all, always do your own research.
Now, purely for your information, the documentation does lay out the technical steps for acquiring the token. This is a pretty standard process in decentralized finance. You'd install a secure crypto wallet, add the token's contract address to it, fund the wallet with the right crypto, connect to a decentralized exchange, and then swap for the token, all while keeping in mind that those transaction fees we talked about are going to apply.
And that really brings us full circle. We've explored the Zen Garden philosophy, the token's coded mechanics, the high-yield incentives, and the very severe disclaimers. It leaves us with this central question to think about. Can a community's ethos truly be encoded into a financial asset? And maybe more importantly, when someone tries, who ultimately benefits?